Night before my father's funeral, his secretary pulled me aside in the hallway outside the viewing room and said, very quietly, "Don't go back to that house alone, not tonight. Not until you've read everything." I almost laughed. My name is Iris. I'm 31 years old, and until 72 hours before that moment, I thought I knew exactly what my life looked like. I had a job I'd built from nothing. A small condo I owned outright, and a father who had, for the last 6 years, been telling me that I was the only one who really understood what he'd built. He wasn't wrong. I was the one who sat with him at the kitchen table when his business partner walked out. I was the one who helped him refinance the property portfolio when the market dipped in 2020. I drove him to his cardiologist appointments because my stepmother, Lenora, said the parking downtown gave her anxiety. I did it without being asked, because that's what I did. His secretary's name was Opal. She'd worked for my father for 19 years. She had a gray bun and reading glasses she kept on a beaded chain, and she smelled like Earl Grey tea and printer ink. She was not a dramatic woman. She was not someone who pulled people aside in hallways. So I listened. She pressed a manila folder into my hands. "Your father gave me this 8 months ago," she said. "He told me to give it to you after the service, but I think you need it before." I took it. I didn't open it. Not there, with the lilies and the low organ music and my stepmother across the room accepting condolences in a black dress that still had the tags removed, which I noticed because I noticed everything that week. I folded the envelope under my arm, and I went back inside, and I sat in the front row, and I got through the rest of the viewing. I opened it in my car, in the funeral home parking lot at 9:47 at night. There were 2 documents inside. The first was a letter in my father's handwriting. The second was a copy of his will. The version I'd never seen. The version based on the date at the top that had been superseded 4 months ago by a different one. The one Lenora's attorney had already sent me a summary of that morning. I read my father's letter 3 times before I fully understood what I was holding. He had written it in October. He'd been sick then, though none of us knew yet how sick. He said he was writing it because he was worried. He said he had started to notice things. Money moved between accounts he didn't remember authorizing. A property deed on one of the rental units, the one on Carver Street, the one I had helped him purchase 12 years ago when I was 19 and co-signed because he needed a second signature, and I trusted him, had been quietly transferred into a joint LLC. He'd asked Lenora about it. She said it was for tax purposes. His accountant, who had also been replaced 8 months prior, had flagged it. He wrote, "I don't know what I've agreed to. My memory isn't what it was. I need you to know that whatever you find, I did not intend for you to lose what was yours." I sat in that parking lot for a long time. Here's what you need to understand about Lenora. She came into our lives when I was 23, which is old enough to not need a stepmother, but young enough to still be hopeful about one. She was warm at first, attentive. She remembered that I took my coffee with oat milk before I'd mentioned it twice. She showed up to my work events and asked real questions and laughed at things that were actually funny. My father was happy in a way I hadn't seen since my mother died, so I made room. I made a lot of room. I did not know until that parking lot how much of that room had been mapped and measured. Her son was involved. That part I should have seen coming, and the fact that I didn't still embarrasses me. His name was Beckett. He was 27 and had the smooth confidence of someone who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. He and I had gotten along fine, in the way people get along fine when they're deciding whether to bother investing in each other. He had worked briefly in my father's property management company to learn the business, Lenora said. He'd been there for 14 months. Long enough, it turned out, to become a co-signatory on 2 operational accounts. Beckett had also, I would learn later, been present when my father signed the amended will. I drove home. I did not call Lenora. I did not call my half-brother. We have different mothers, we're close enough. Because I needed to think before I spoke. I knew myself well enough to know that if I called someone I loved that night, I would cry, and crying would have to wait. What I did instead was make coffee and sit at my kitchen table and read every document in that folder 3 more times. My father had built a real estate portfolio over 30 years, nothing spectacular by national standards, but substantial by ours. 11 properties across 2 counties managed in-house, mostly long-term residential rentals. When my mother died, he'd restructured ownership so that I held a 22% stake, documented and notarized, specifically because he wanted me protected if anything happened to him before I was established. That stake had been part of my understanding of my own financial life for 8 years. It informed decisions I'd made, the condo I bought, the loan I declined, the amended will, the one Lenora's attorney had summarized that morning, made no mention of the stake. It referenced the LLC, the one created 8 months ago, and transferred controlling interest to a family trust, a trust in which Lenora was the primary trustee, a trust in which Beckett was the named successor trustee, a trust I was not a party to. I went to the bedroom. I found the original documentation of my stake, the notarized letter, the letter my father had signed when I was 23, the one that predated Lenora by 2 years. I put it on the table next to his October letter. Then I opened my laptop and I started reading about estate law. I didn't sleep that night. Pain doesn't always come in waves. Sometimes it arrives like a room you walk into that you didn't know existed, and you just stand there while the walls figure out where to go. By 5 in the morning, I wasn't crying anymore. I was writing. I made a list of every property I had documentation for. I made a list of every signature that should have required my involvement. I found three. Three transactions involving assets connected to the portfolio where my existing stake, if valid, would have required either my signature or formal notice. I had received neither. At 7:15, I called the one person I knew to call. Her name is Frederica. She was my mother's college roommate and has been an estate attorney in this state for 26 years. She is the person my mother would have called, and I think on some level I always kept her number because I knew a day might come when I would need someone in my corner who had known me before I needed corners. I told her everything in 22 minutes. She asked me 3 questions. Then she said, "Don't move anything, don't communicate with Lenora or her attorney until we've talked again, and send me everything your father left you." I did. The funeral was the next morning. I dressed carefully. I wore the gray dress my father had once told me made me look like I meant business. I sat in the front row. I shook hands. I accepted condolences. Lenora stood beside me for the reception portion and at one point put her hand on my arm and said, softly, "I know this is a lot. We'll figure everything out together." "Of course," I said. I smiled in every photo. She had no idea. Here's what I've learned about people who underestimate you. They stop watching you after a while. They assume the shape of you is fixed. They saw you cry at the hospital. They saw you drive the cardiologist appointments. They called it devotion because that was the container that was most useful to them, and once they'd labeled it, they stopped looking any closer. Lenore had labeled me devoted, dependable, slightly too sentimental to be strategic. She was not entirely wrong about the sentimental part. She was catastrophically wrong about the rest. Frederica moved quickly. Within 4 days of the funeral, she had filed a formal notice of interest in the estate on my behalf, based on the predating documentation of my stake. This triggered a mandatory hold on asset transfer while the estate was reviewed. Lenora's attorney, a man named Sullivan who wore pocket squares and spoke in a tone that implied everyone in the room should be grateful for his time, sent a response letter that was politely dismissive. Frederica sent back a 40-page filing. In the meantime, I quietly reached out to the original accountant, the one who'd been replaced. His name was Bernard. He was 63 and retired, and he was not happy about how things had ended. He had documentation of the account changes. He had flagged them internally before his contract was terminated. He had, because he was a meticulous man, kept copies of everything. Bernard met me for coffee at a diner near his house. He brought a folder. I brought a folder. We sat across from each other for 2 hours while he walked me through a timeline. The LLC had been formed 11 months ago. Beckett was listed as managing member. The Carver Street property, the one I'd co-signed at 19, had been moved into the LLC 9 months ago via a quitclaim deed. My father's signature was on it. Did he understand what he was signing? I asked. Bernard looked at his coffee. He was not well, he said carefully. His memory had been declining for about a year. He trusted the people around him. I nodded. I took a breath. "Thank you," I said, "for keeping this." He looked up at me with the expression of a man who had been waiting to be useful. "Your father talked about you," he said. "A lot. He was proud of you. I think he knew toward the end that something wasn't right. I think that's why he wrote the letter." I drove home and I cried for 45 minutes. Then I stopped. Then I went back to work. Frederica's filing created complications for Lenora's timeline. She had apparently planned to have the asset transfer finalized within 60 days of the funeral. clean and unchallenged. The hold disrupted that. The LLC couldn't move forward with any of the portfolio properties while the estate was under review, which meant the property management contracts, the vendor agreements, the insurance policies. All of it sat in a kind of administrative suspension. Beckett started texting me. At first it was friendly. "Hey Iris, hope you're doing okay. This process is really painful for everyone. Let me know if you want to talk." Then it was less friendly. "My mom says there might be some documentation confusion. Can you call her?" Then it was very much not friendly. "Iris, I don't know what you've been told, but you're going to make this a lot worse than it needs to be. Just let Frederica talk to Sullivan and work something out." I didn't respond to any of them. Not because I was being strategic, though I was, but because I genuinely did not know what I would say if I started talking. 4 weeks after the funeral, Sullivan's office requested a settlement meeting. I wore the same gray dress. It was in a glass conference room in a downtown building with a view of the river. Sullivan sat on one side with Lenora and Beckett. Frederica sat beside me. There was a catered tray of fruit nobody touched. Sullivan opened with a number. I let Frederica respond. She explained very calmly that the predating documentation of my stake was valid, that the quitclaim deed on Carver Street had been executed during a period in which my father's documented cognitive decline raised significant questions about informed consent, that the LLC formation had not been disclosed to me as a co-owner of record, and that the 3 transactions which should have required my signature or notice could be considered irregularities that warranted regulatory review. She put a compliance filing on the table. Not threatening, just informational. Just a copy of what had already been submitted. Sullivan's pocket square did not save him from going slightly pale. Lenora spoke for the first time. "Your father wanted the family taken care of," she said. Her voice was controlled. "This is what he wanted." I looked at her for a moment. "Then you'll have no problem confirming that in writing," I said. "With documentation." Silence. The thing about people who build plans around your compliance is that they haven't prepared for the moment when you simply stop complying. They have a whole architecture built around your agreement. Take that away, and the structure has nothing to stand on. Lenore had counted on me being too grieved to look closely. She had counted on Beckett charming his way through any friction. She had counted on Sullivan managing me out of the room with legal language I wouldn't fully parse. She had not counted on Opal. She had not counted on Bernard, and she had deeply, significantly underestimated the woman my father had spent 30 years telling me I was. The negotiation took 3 more weeks. There were 4 more meetings and more emails than I want to count. In the end, Frederica secured a structured settlement. My original stake was formally recognized. The Carver Street property was returned to the estate and then distributed according to the original documentation. And I received a cash equivalent for the interest that had accrued during the period of the LLC. I did not take the whole portfolio. I didn't want it. I wanted what was mine, and I wanted what was mine, and I wanted it clean. Beckett lost his position as successor trustee. The LLC was dissolved. Sullivan stopped wearing pocket squares to our meetings. Or maybe he did, and I just stopped noticing. I was not present at the final signing. I was at a work event, a thing I'd planned months earlier and refused to cancel. Frederica handled it. She texted me at 3:42 in the afternoon, "Done. Clean. Go enjoy your evening." I did. The last message I received from Lenora was 3 weeks after settlement. It said, "I hope one day you can understand this wasn't personal." I thought about that for a long time. I thought about what it means to say something isn't personal when you spend 4 years building a relationship with someone specifically to position yourself around the assets adjacent to them. I thought about the cardiologist appointments and the oat milk and the things I told her over dinners that I thought were real. I didn't reply. There is a version of this story where I am angrier, where I want them to suffer, publicly, visibly, in a way that everyone can see and understand. And I won't pretend that version of me didn't exist for a few weeks. But the version of me that sat in that parking lot with my father's letter, the one where he said I did not intend for you to lose what was yours, that version of me just wanted to make sure he was right. I went back to visit Opal 2 months later. She'd retired by then, was living with her daughter in the suburbs. I brought her a plant, a fiddle leaf fig, because she'd mentioned once that she'd always wanted one and never kept one alive. She cried a little. I cried a little. She told me my father used to read my work emails to her sometimes, just because he liked hearing that I was doing well. I thanked her for the folder, for the timing, for knowing it mattered. She waved me off the way people wave you off when they don't know how to take a compliment. He would have wanted you to know, she said. He just didn't always know how to tell you himself. I drive past the Carver Street property sometimes. It's a fourplex, gray siding, big oak tree in the front yard. I co-signed on it when I was 19 years old and had no idea what I was doing but believed in my father enough to do it anyway. The tenants there have been there for years. They shovel the walk in winter without being asked. I don't own it anymore. I sold my share after the settlement because I wanted the liquidity more than I wanted the symbolism. But I drive past it sometimes. I look at the oak tree. I think about a 19-year-old girl who signed something because she trusted someone and how long that trust held and what it took to figure out what was worth holding and what wasn't. My father was not a perfect man. He chose Lenora, and he let things slip, and he left me a letter instead of a conversation, which is maybe the most him thing he could have done. But he also left me Opal. He also wrote down what he meant. He also, somewhere in the fog of the last year of his life, made sure someone who loved him was paying attention. I think about that. When things are hard, and they still are, sometimes because grief doesn't resolve on a settlement schedule, I think about the fact that he was trying to protect me even when he didn't fully have the words. That's not nothing. That's actually everything. I didn't stay small. I didn't go quietly. I didn't let the version of events they wrote become the only version that existed. I left with what was mine. I left with my name intact. And I left knowing that the most valuable thing my father ever gave me wasn't on any deed or in any account. It was 19 years of watching him work and learning, without knowing I was learning, exactly how things were built, and exactly how they could fall apart, and exactly what it took to be the person who made sure they didn't. They thought I was too sentimental to look closely. I was looking the whole time.